Good evening and welcome to Seven Stories Up. Joshua Miele with Andrew Leland, Connecting Dots, A Blind Life. We are delighted to have you all join us tonight at the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library. Before we begin, I would like to thank the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for making programs like this evening's conversation possible. I would like to encourage you to visit NYPL's website and take a look at future Seven Stories Up programs. We have an excellent lineup featuring up-and-coming literary voices, one-of-a-kind performances, and hopefully, future award-winning nonfiction. We would love for you to join us again. It is now my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. Dr. Miele is a prominent blind scientist, designer, and thought leader in accessible technology and disability. He is a recipient of the 2021 MacArthur Genius Fellowship, an Amazon Design Scholar, and Distinguished Fellow at UC Berkeley's Othering and Belonging Institute. He is known for creating inclusive technologies that address critical needs and challenge societal assumptions, and for speaking with frank humor and directness about the lived disability experience. Dr. Miele helps guide the non-visual customer experience for Amazon devices and advises widely on accessible design, research methods, and disability inclusion. He is the father of 2 adult children and lives with his wife in Berkeley, California. His memoir, Connecting Dots, A Blind Life, is available wherever books are sold or borrowed. Andrew Leland is the author of The Country of the Blind, a memoir at the end of sight, which was a finalist for the 2024 Pulitzer Prize in Memoir. His work has appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, Radio Lab, and elsewhere. He's a contributing editor to The Believer and teaches journalism at Wesleyan University. Without further ado, please welcome tonight's speakers.
Thanks, Chancey. Thanks, everybody. We had planned to be on stage already when during Chancey's talk, because Josh, you had said, what did you said about blind people getting on stage at an event?
I just thought it would be better to be in place. Otherwise, everybody's like, they see the blind people going up on stage and they're like, oh, I hope it's going to, should I help? Is it going to be okay? And it is going to be okay.
We crushed it.
Yeah, it is going to be okay.
Yeah. It's a plant in the front row there. This is so wonderful for me to be here. There's a part in your memoir where you have first gotten to UC Berkeley, where you went for an undergrad, and you discover a place called The Cave, which is underneath Moffitt Library, and that was where you realized that blind people could be cool, and indeed that blindness could be cool, I think you write. And for me, when I first started researching blindness, and I met you pretty early in that journey, I really feel like you were the person who made me realize that blindness could be cool. So this is just wonderful. Yeah, round of applause for blindness being cool, and for Dr. Miele.
Super thrilled and delighted. First of all, thank you, New York Public Library, Chancey. Thank you, everyone who was part of making this happen. Thanks to the Andrew Haskell Braille and Talking Book Library for setting this up and for live streaming. And thanks, Andrew, for being in this conversation about blindness, about my own personal experience of blindness, and it's just, this is very exciting.
You're doing my job for me. I was supposed to thank everybody, but thanks for covering that.
I just, I like to, make sure things. I get nervous that I'm going to forget to thank people. So, so about The Cave. So first of all, of course, I didn't discover The Cave. The Cave was there and well known by the blind students and blind community that were already in Berkeley. What I discovered, as you say, is when I was growing up, I was really the only blind person I knew who was, I thought I was the only person like me, a blind person who was blind but wasn't, busy bumping into walls and feeling sorry for himself and wondering where everything was. And of course, that's not actually the experience of blind people. For the vast majority of us are totally self-actualized, self-realized, amazing people. But I was as subject to the imagery and stereotypes of blindness that are pervasive in history, literature, and popular culture as everyone else was. And so I really had a very negative idea of who blind people were and could be, even though I knew I was cool, I knew I was funny. So I didn't really think I wasn't like those other blind people. And then when I got to Berkeley, I was like, I met, the cave was just where people were, and there's a lot more to say, of course, about the cave, but the community was the really astonishing part, and it was a community of amazing, smart, funny, blind people who were, as much like me and not like me as anyone could possibly want. And like so many other folks who show up at college thinking that they are the only one like them, I realized that I was far from being the only one who was like me, and in fact that I was part of a global community of amazing blind people. And it was the beginning of my not only shedding the ableism that I grew up with, but of embracing and taking pride in my blindness and my place in this amazing community.
I want to spend most of the time there, but because we're talking, because the occasion of tonight is your amazing book, which celebrates your amazing life, it seems natural for me to want to start in that kind of like pre-blindness being cool period, or at least the pre-cave times. Usually we start in the cave, but for you the cave is when you emerge, really. So we gotta go before the cave.
I went into the cave.
Yeah.
I didn't emerge from the cave.
Exactly.
Right.
And I guess like I'm kind of getting too meta with this question, but knowing that Chancey Fleet was going to introduce us also is really meaningful to me, because she was, I think, probably next to you, like the other person who really like kind of knocked me in the head with like the blind wisdom bat early on in my research. And I remember be at the Andrew High School library branch of this library where she works and runs the Incredible Dimensions Lab. I think, I was interviewing her with my journalist hat on, and I think I asked about, I don't know if I asked the cause of her blindness. I was talking about my retinitis pigmentosa, and I was like, so I don't know about you. And I was just struck by the force of her dismissal, like not in a defensive way, but just like, not interesting, dude, move on. And and now I kind of like shudder and sort of cringe, like as much as I could physically cringe to remember that. But I say all that because like normally if I'm on stage with the likes of you, like I wouldn't dream of talking about like how you became blind either. But also this book goes into not just detail, but like with like the sort of engineered like scientific minds detail. Like we learn about the like the science of sulfuric acid, and you have this like beautiful disquisition on like how the fire extinguisher production has changed. And so I wonder, I guess like I'll start with a meta question of like what made you want to return to that early pre-cave time and the sort of what must be in part at least a very painful time in your life.
Well, and not necessarily not nearly as painful as having to tell people that that's not what we want to talk about, right? And having written about it in my book, I am not telling you that that's not what we want to talk about, because as part of the process of confronting the reality of writing a memoir, I realized that you can't write a memoir and not tell people how you became blind, right? It's like people want to know. And this is actually a great spot for me to give out another acknowledgement and super props and appreciation to Wendell Jameson, who's here in the audience. Wendell, raise your hand and say hi. My co-author and collaborator on this book. Like so many other, there's almost nothing that I have ever done that's worth doing that I did on my own. There are always collaborators and supporters, mentors, and even the naysayers are people who kind of egg you on a lot of the time. And Wendell and I met maybe a decade ago or a little more, when he wanted to. He got in touch with me out of the blue because he grew up in the same neighborhood that I did, and he remembers as a young person how the neighborhood was impacted by the news and activity around me getting burned as a little kid. And so Wendell really was an amazing artist and engineer in helping not only do a lot of the heavy lifting of putting a memoir together, but in helping me understand how to tell a story in a way that's going to connect with people. Because at first I was like, well, maybe we don't have to tell that part. And he was like, no, we have to tell that part. We can hit it and move on, but we have to tell it. And I was like, maybe we should put it at the end, you know? And he was like, no, let's just put it at the beginning where it is in time, and just let's not do any postmodern structural stuff here. Let's just tell it and and explain how things started, and we don't have to linger, but let's let people know. And of course he was brilliantly and absolutely right about it. So the book does tell how I was, born a sighted kid and got burned by sulfuric acid at the age of 4 at the hands of a neighbor who was mentally ill, and that's part of the reality to grapple with, because of course mental illness is also a disability, and part of what this book is about is normalizing and humanizing disability. And so I don't really make a huge effort to humanize or tell his story, but of course he has a story as well. And but I do take pains to say that I am not, I don't feel like somebody did this to me. I feel like I went through, it's like a natural process, or just a thing that happened that I had to grapple with and move on. And of course, there's no moving on from becoming disabled. You move with disability, because I'm not overcoming it. I'm just sort of managing what disability, what a disabled life is like. So really, the vast majority of the book is about being disabled, and only a little piece of it is about becoming disabled, because I think that's kind of, although everybody wants to know, it is, to me, the least interesting part of it.
I think you really pull that off so beautifully in this book, and it doesn't just end with that sort of the beginning part of it that we're talking about, because I think, time and again as you go through your entire life, there's your kind of misspent youth, if I may call it that, right? There's
I feel like it was pretty well spent.
Well spent, but in the traditional, right? Yeah, some bad decisions, or at least some from the parental perspective.
Whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Exactly. But from there to college, and then sort of all of the exciting, first shoots of your career in your 20s, all of it you can sort of look at in both ways, where it's on the one hand, as you say, I think around the teenage stuff, this was a pretty typical teenage life, right? And then, but the other hand, there is blindness there, and you can't really, there's no point. It would be absurd to try to remove that from the equation. Yeah. And that feels so paradoxical to me, and yet also how identity works. How do you think about that kind of tension?
So just for those who have not yet been able to read the book, I was born in Brooklyn and raised in Rockland, which is about 20 miles north of the city. It's the suburbs, which is not a healthy native environment for blind people, I'll just say. Blind people survive and thrive best where there are sidewalks and good public transit, which there aren't where I was. So I spent a lot of time being kind of bored. I had lots of good friends, but we sort of had to entertain ourselves. And so acid is a great way to entertain yourself. Not sulfuric acid, but I mean, my wife Liz said that I should have named the book "My Life on Acid." So the identity of a blind kid who grows up alone, blindness-wise. Like there were no other blind people that I wanted to, I knew I had met other blind people as a teenager, but they weren't anybody that I wanted to hang with. Almost nobody.
And can you say why not? Like, what was it? Was it that you had too much attitude to like recognize their coolness, or did you just meet the wrong blind people?
Many of the blind people that I met in my blind camp experience at Camp Wapanaki. Any Wapanaki people here? No. Okay. Many of them that I met, I did meet one lifelong friend there at Wapanaki, which was a camp run by the New York Institute for the Blind here in New York. The camp was up in Vermont. They just weren't cool. They weren't people who were independent. They weren't thinking for themselves. They weren't doing for themselves. They were acting blind, like in the stereotypical what I had, what my prejudice and ableism were telling me was the way blind people acted, and that's what I perceived in them, in many of them, and I just didn't want that. I didn't want to be that, and so I was not, I didn't want to be part of that community, but I did want to be part of the community of cool kids in my high school who were playing music and being in bands and taking acid and it was absolutely and unequivocally part of what formed me into the thinking about things as I do, and I wouldn't trade that experience for anything really. Even though if there had I was a child of the 70s, my parents, as wonderful as they were, weren't always paying as much attention as may have been healthy for me, and I was given probably a lot more freedom than was physically good for me.
I was just at the Christine Sung Kim show at the Whitney this afternoon. It was like, I think the first, I might be getting this wrong, but the first major museum retrospective by a signing deaf artist in this country's history. And it's incredible. And she does these really great infographics. And there's one, I think it's like, the title is like Reasons My Parents Sign. And it's this really beautiful pie chart of all the different reasons, and some of them are funny and some of them are touching. And I think if you look at if you read enough, I haven't read that much deaf history or culture, but it seems like the hearing parent's decision to learn sign language is transformational for a deaf child. And yet, in talking to lots and lots of blind people, and I think reading your memoir, it seems to me that like for a sighted parent of a blind kid, the best thing to do is kind of be checked out. And like, there's an amazing moment in your book when you're like roller skating indoors, like not too long after you became blind, and your mom was like, "You're gonna mess the floors up. Go do that outside." And like, it's not a lot of sighted parents who would have that reaction. So I wonder, like, what is it that made you what is it about your upbringing that kind of sets you onto the cool blind path?
And that's exactly right. There's this tension between sort of freedom and safety that I think I was given a lot more freedom than safety, which was incredible for me. I was the right kid for that job, and it benefited me enormously. And I think that one of the things that I talk about in the memoir is the importance of family and teachers and friends and mentors who don't do for you, but help you figure out how to do things. And that's the kind of parents I had. They were not checked out. They were very hands-on and active and engaged in what I was doing and advocating for me and teaching me to advocate for myself as a blind person. But there's this continuum of if you think of the line with safety at one end and freedom at the other end, you've got to sort of find this spot in the middle where you can live and thrive. Mm-hmm. And so, the reason I am who I am is because I had the parents I had and the teachers I had, and there's no doubt about that. So I forgot what you asked.
You answered it. You know, the impact that your parents had on you, and how it led to your being an independent blind person.
Yeah.
So very, very early on in the book, I've transcended page numbers, but so I can't quote what page number it's on, but it's probably page 1. You say that becoming blind made you an engineer, and this is something that I think pretty early on, you know, after meeting you and Chancey certainly, but also just, you know, losing vision myself and talking to lots of blind people, there seems to be a very intimate relationship between blindness and a kind of hacking mentality or a scientific method or an engine, whatever you want to call it. And I wonder, like, what is your earliest memory of that kind of realization or recognition that blindness and engineering were very tightly linked for you?
That's a really interesting question. And it's not, you know, I think the way I think of it is that sort of disability is the mother of invention. We as disabled people, not just blind people, but people with disabilities, always have to figure out how we're going to do the things that we want to do that are not designed for us. And so we're always in a position of having to apply creative thinking and problem solving to these things that other people can just waltz into and do. And so it creates a mindset of sort of, how am I going to do this? And I think you know, I tell this story in the book of it's not really an invention, but it's sort of recognizing a situation where I have to use different information than other people use to do the same thing they do. So it sort of leverages the roller skating story you were telling a minute ago, when my mom, you know, decided that I wasn't allowed to roller skate in the metal-wheeled 1970s roller skates on the terracotta floor, that I had to go outside and roller skate on the sidewalk in Brooklyn. And so I went out and was, you know, roller skating up and down the block, and I noticed that the sounds that I was hearing that were reflecting from my noisy skates off of the stoops and fences and trees and parked cars, that I could actually hear where those things were based on just the sound from my skates. And while sighted, I realized, you know, I was like, at first I was like, how am I going to roller skate up and down the sidewalk without bumping into, you know, the fences or the trees? And I realized pretty quickly as I experimented with skating on the sidewalk that the sounds that I was hearing from my skates were a huge help in hearing where these things were, and that sound was something that I was going to pay attention to because I needed to. But that, you know, and while a sighted person could, if they wanted to pay attention to it, certainly could, I needed to. And so the thing that most sighted people wouldn't even recognize as carrying information, I found to be the key to being able to, you know, roller skate up and down the street without, you know, falling off the curb.
And that story has like the kind of like twinned, like the sort of absolute normality of blindness and the sort of like specialness and alterity, kind of like the double helix right in there, because it's like, you describe it in the book, where you're like, people would understandably like look out their stoops and see this blind kid roller skating and be like, this is incredible, how are you doing this? But from your perspective, you're like, what are you talking about? I'm just like, this is echolocation, man.
This is just what I do.
Yeah.
And the other part of it to sort of acknowledge, and as I do in the book, but to say it here, is that, you know, a lot of the time there's this myth of compensatory senses, right? Like, oh, blind people, like, oh, you must smell better than I do, right? But really, we just pay more attention to stuff because we need to attend to a lot of cues that people who can see don't even have to concern themselves with. So there's nothing better about a blind person's hearing or a blind person's sense of smell or touch. It's just that we pay a lot more attention, and we teach ourselves to parse the information that we get more than we otherwise would have to. And so it's not the senses; it's the processing that does that we use.
I want to talk to you about another kind of like core tension that I encounter in thinking about disability, and it's all through your work, which is the sort of mainstream versus disability, I guess. For me, it starts when I first met you. We talked a lot about this, which is, and I think it's an interesting moment in your career where you're obsessed with science and outer space. Like space is your sort of like core geekery for a long time. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I still spend a ridiculous amount of time sort of imagining how to build inflatable space stations.
Inflatable space stations.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a good moment for a detour. What what are you talking about?
Well, I mean, if you have to, I think the easiest way to build a space station or a habitat in orbit or that's not on a planet would not be to sort of get up there with welding torches and soldering and rivet guns, but to build a balloon basically and pack it up and fly it up and then blow it up, right? Wow. And I think that probably other people have thought about that. I don't think I invented that idea by any stretch, but I think I wake up in the middle of the night and I think about the geometry of how you would do something like that, and that's it's just an obsession, right? I mean, you do that too, right?
Of all the time, yeah. For me, it's inflatable music festivals. I think about. But so you're having these obsessions, and then you end up pretty early on in your career getting a chance to intern at NASA, and then it turns into like what basically is like a real gig there, right? And yet it also ends with this sort of extremely disappointing moment for you where you kind of have this revelation, and then that's the pivot in your career where you turn sort of full bore into accessibility. And I wonder if we can like zoom in on that and what was disappointing to you about this sort of like mainstream scientific tech engineering gig that could have been your dream for your whole life as a kid, dreaming about space, and then wanting to leave it behind and move into accessibility.
So I wanted to be a space scientist. I've always wanted to be a space scientist. I studied physics at Berkeley with the intention of studying planetary physics and atmospheres and solar processes and stuff like that, and went to have an internship at NASA with a couple of different internships at NASA, and there were two huge disappointments about it. One was that while I was there working on the Mars Observer, which was a spacecraft, there was a team that I was attached to as an intern that had sent an instrument on board a spacecraft to Mars. Like, holy moly, like that's like an amazing internship opportunity for somebody with my interests. And so I was incredibly, it was just unbelievable to be part of it. I had to pinch myself all the time. But while I was there, the spacecraft was scheduled to arrive at Mars while I was there. And just to tell a long story short, and I hope it's not a spoiler for the book, but the spacecraft blew up, which was super disappointing, right? Not only for me as an intern, but for the people who had built there. Because you don't say, let's send a craft to Mars and have it be there next week, right? There were people that I was working with who had spent the majority of their careers doing this one spacecraft. So that was a huge disappointment. But also, I was astonished to learn that even though I thought I understood about giant bureaucracies as a UC Berkeley student, it turns out that NASA has UC Berkeley way beat. And I realized that while I could be a scientist at NASA, I was sort of being offered that opportunity, I was also realizing that I'm not always the most motivated person. I actually am kind of lazy and sometimes will kind of fuck off if given the opportunity. And I didn't really want to be in an environment where I could get away with that. And And so that was the other disappointment, to realize that, like, if I were going to make a career at NASA, I would really have to be super self-motivated and drive myself. And I wasn't sure if I had that, honestly. And the other thing that happened around the same time was to realize that I didn't have all of the accessible technology that I needed as a blind physicist, or as a blind student, or as a blind computer user. And that the tools that were being designed for blind people to have access to the information and resources that we needed to follow the career paths that we wanted and the educational paths that we wanted were being designed by sighted people largely. And I was like, no, man, I want to be a blind person designing the technology that blind people use, because I know I have a better handle on what blindness is all about. I have a better handle on what we need, and I don't want sighted people to be designing the technology that I need. So I pivoted at that point to go into accessibility rather than space science. And honestly, I think that the creativity and problem solving and the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation around that career have been way more fulfilling and exciting than any career I could have had in space science.
It seems to me that there's like a related dynamic to the one where blindness is sort of like depressing or like not something that you want to be associated with, and then you get to the cave, with all these brilliant, technologically savvy, hilarious blind people, and you realize it's cool. And by the same token, there's like NASA is the sort of received idea of like science being cool. You send contraptions you build into outer space, but then the realization becomes that like what's going on at Berkeley Systems, reading your book, it's just so vivid, because like NASA, it really is just like this like air-conditioned dungeon that you're sitting in, like typing lines of Unix code, and somebody pokes their head into the office once every 2 weeks, and like makes sure you're still alive. Whereas like Berkeley Systems, you're like wolfing down sushi and like partying and like getting to build screen readers, and it sounds like a blast.
Yeah.
So it's a version of that, like blindness, actually accessibility work being vivid and cool and cutting edge as much as NASA science is. And
a matter of scale, right? Like when you're at a little startup with 5 other people working on something, it's like the extreme opposite of a huge federal administration with tens of thousands of people working at it. So it was just sort of these two amazing extremes. And also the amount of sort of work that everybody had to do when you're at a little startup. I was doing I wasn't writing code at the start at Berkeley Systems, but I was doing pretty much everything else. I was doing the tech, not alone, but like I was part of doing the tech support. I was writing the documentation. I was writing the ad copy. I was designing, like one of the cool things that I did there, which was kind of a precursor to my next career. I designed these tactile materials. Like when we were selling, so Berkeley Systems was selling an early screen reader for the Mac and then for Windows. It was the first screen reader. For those who don't know, a screen reader is a piece of software that blind people use to interact with either their phone or a computer. It helps you not only know what's on the screen, but interact with things like buttons and checkboxes. It gives you the ability to review and also control the computer. And we had created the first one for a graphical computer. Before that, it had all been for DOS or Linux or command line based stuff, which is really easy because that's just text. So blind people had great access to these command line environments. And we created this tool that for the first time gave blind people access to this incredibly visual environment, and how, like, not only did we have to document how we were going, how to use the software, we had to explain a Macintosh. We had to explain a GUI to blind people. And now you don't really have to do that anymore. It's like most people find it pretty obvious, but as part of the documentation for our screen reader, Outspoken, I created a set of tactile graphics that were illustrations of dialog boxes and menus and file folders and tiled and cascaded windows on top of each other. And it was just, it was my first professional experience of creating tactile graphics. And I am a huge tactile graphics lover and proponent and designer. And it was an amazing experience. And so as part of my Berkeley systems, I feel like, everything I ever needed to know, I learned in kindergarten. I feel like everything I needed to know, I kind of learned at Berkeley Systems.
And that's also the time when you start becoming a little more political about disability, it sounds like. And I'm thinking in particular of these like amazing stories you have about sort of, how do you call it? Like guerrilla political street theater, would you call it?
That's good. That's good.
Around both interventions into like some performative accessibility in ATMs in Berkeley and also signage. And can you just talk about like what you encountered on the ATMs and what made you so angry and what did you do about it?
So,
and why?
So performance, it can be done in two different ways, right? Performance, you can do like there's one thing that I have, so you asked about ATMs, right? Yeah. ATMs in the 90s had Braille all over them, but didn't talk or give a blind person any way of interacting with them. So you had no way of knowing what the screen was saying to you, and there was Braille all over it, but actually mostly the Braille just said, I'll summarize, if you need help, ask a sighted person. Which is not accessibility, but so that's what I would call actually performative accessibility. It's like they're doing the accessibility, they're like showing this ostensibly accessible experience. Look everybody, it's got Braille all over it. It's accessible, but actually it's not at all accessible. Like when a blind person comes up to it, there's no way that Braille makes them able to independently use that device. So that's what I would call performative. There's another version of performative accessibility where people do accessibility just so that they can, talk about it and publicize it, and don't really value the accessibility that it provides. That's another performative accessibility. But then there's the performance art around accessibility, which is more my kind of, what I was doing at the time, which is just to sort of do things that are very visible, that demonstrate to the world how inaccessible things are and the contortions and hoops you have to jump through in order to get the information you need or do the things you want to do. So one example was, the ATMs. I had an incident where I actually, it was the middle of the night. I needed money. The ATM wasn't working. I couldn't figure out why. Because I couldn't read the screen. And I wound up like kicking in the front door of a Wells Fargo, which was in fact the same Wells Fargo that Patty Hearst had robbed in a couple of decades earlier. So me and Patty, but also so following that frustration, I went out and got a rubber stamp and a ink pad of red ink, and the stamp said, "Don't believe the Braille. This machine is not accessible to blind customers." And I went around the East Bay stamping that in the middle of ATM screens. And my girlfriend at the time was like, "I don't think you should put it on the screen because it makes it hard for people to use the ATM." Yeah, she didn't stay my girlfriend very long. And then another interesting, sort of performative or performance art thing that I did was around accessible signage and wayfinding. There was no accessible GPS technology in the 90s was really in its very infancy. I remember one amazing hike that Mike May and I took where we had backpacks with laptops in them and like GPS satellite antennas like strapped to our shoulders, and the laptop was running flat out and gave you about an hour of GPS, and it was incredible, but like completely impractical for real blind people to do wayfinding. So we didn't have that. That wasn't a thing. And so I went through a phase of, I found out that actually street signs, they're embossed, they're just really high up. So all you have to do if you want to find out where you are is climb the street sign and read the embossing, the raised letters. And so that was like, actually, I got really excited about it, but it's really hard to climb a street sign and hold on with one hand while you read with the other hand. So I started carrying around a vice grips that I would clamp onto the signpost at about shoulder height and then sort of heave myself up and stand on the clamp. And then I could just very casually kind of reach up with one hand and read the sign. And of course, people are like, excuse me, could I help you? And it's like, nah, I'm just trying to figure out whether this is, Virginia Street or Cedar. And, and they're like, oh, it's Virginia. And I'm like, yeah, I know now, but. So that's, another kind of performance, just to say like, hey, like, look at how inaccessible the world is. Like you got it good. You can just look up at these signs and read them, but we have to jump through all kinds of hoops to get just the basics that we need to sort of get to school or work or find our friend's house. And it's inequitable, and sort of raising the alarm on that kind of inequity. Like you can, there's all kinds of ways you can do that. You can, complain about it. You can write a memoir about it, or you can climb signs and show people how irritating it all is. So that's what I was doing at the time. I'm not really a sign climber anymore.
Yeah.
Thank God I have my phone, right?
Yeah. I mean, I wish we had 2 hours, but I feel, in being conscious of the time, I want to save some time here to talk to you, to get into some of the nitty gritty about the work that you do, and really the work that, beginning at Berkeley Systems, leading through your time at Smith Kettlewell, where you did all these incredible projects, including, is it called TMAPS? Is that how you pronounce it?
TMAP, yep.
TMAP, yeah, where you're basically, for the first time in the history of blind people, you could just sort of print out a tactile map of your neighborhood, or You Describe, which is this amazing crowdsourced audio description project for YouTube, and then onto your work at Amazon. Not to like completely breeze through a couple decades of your career, and hopefully during the Q&A we'll have time to.
Well, that is what the book. You can read the book.
Yeah,
right?
read the book, guys.
Yeah.
But I feel like, especially for an audience or for a reader who doesn't have experience thinking about disability or accessibility, it's easy to hear these stories and think like, well, how dare the ATM company, be so callous and just put all this performative braille on it. But I think, somebody in your position where not only have you been on the sort of kicking the doors in on banks level frustration of it, but also you've been, in the lab trying to solve some of these problems. It's not just so easy as let's just make it accessible. You forgot to flip the accessibility switch, right? It's like this incredibly complicated design problem. And I guess one piece of that complication that I want to ask you about is has to do with I guess diversity. Like briefly, I'll tell you a story about a guy I met who is a blind guy or is low vision, and he lives in Boston, and he had the ear of some city councilor, and he was like, you guys filled in all the cracks in my neighborhood with, I think it was with like the wrong kind of cement. And he's like, I would really rely on these cracks to know where I was. And it was like, and he was talking to the city councilor, and maybe this is the only blind person they would know. And it was like, oh, okay, blind people don't like it when we fill in the cracks with whatever
blind
it was.
People like cracked sidewalks.
Concrete. Or it was even like, they like this particular, it's like, or Kathy Kudlick, who I think
Yeah.
a wonderful blind historian, she made this exhibition at UCSF about disability history and was like, okay, this is gonna be the most accessible exhibition ever made. And then a blind person in a wheelchair came in and said, I can't reach the Braille. It's like, oh, we didn't think of the fact that maybe somebody would need Braille at a particular height. And so I guess I just wonder, like, this is an incredibly broad question, but when you're approaching a project, like, if somebody in this room gets inspired and they're like, I want to apply all of my, engineering, scientific genius, as you have, to accessibility, like, what are some core principles that we should understand about how to make a product, whatever it is, whether it's a website or an inflatable space station, accessible?
So the book is called Connecting Dots, A Blind Life, and it is a blind life. It is my blind life, and there are as many different ways to be blind as there are blind people. And so my experience informs my creative accessibility work, but it is not, it's where I start. It's how I know, like, I don't have to start from square one, because not only do I know about my own blind experience, I know a lot of other blind people and their blind experiences. And so I can start from the things that I know, but when designing accessibility, or designing anything really, you have to make sure that the people that are going to be using it, that you understand the needs of the people that are going to be using it. And I am one particular kind of blind person, but think of the blind people that are 80 and losing their vision. Think of the blind people who are, have different levels of education, who live in other countries with different levels of industrialization and development, people who have different economic constraints, right? There's like people who can see, like, and there's even a million kinds, like some, when I say blind, I mean all of us with visual disabilities, but some people think that blind just means like lights out total blindness, but in fact there are all kinds of gradations of blindness. So when you're designing an experience to be accessible, you have to make sure that you're informing yourself about all of the different people whose needs you're trying to meet. And sometimes that means acknowledging explicitly that you're not going to meet certain needs, right? You can't always please everybody. And sometimes you have to say, we're going to make this experience accessible for, right? So the first step in designing an accessible experience, I think, is to say accessible for whom, right? And then once you've decided for whom, to make sure that you understand those people's needs and desires and strengths, as well as the context, not just like, how does a blind person use a computer, but like, what kinds of computers do blind people use, and where do they use them, and when do they use them, and what other things are they doing while they're using those computers? And computers are just an example. So really, I guess the basic answer is be intentional and make sure you are super well informed about what you're doing. And even as a blind person, I always make sure that I do, like, if I'm going to create something that's that's intended for use by a wide variety of people with different blindness experiences, you have to do research, you have to do focus groups, you have to, whatever level of research you can afford to do, whether it's time or money or both that are the constraints, you must do it. And take that feedback into account. And don't do that research after you've finished doing the design. Do it before, and incorporate what you've learned into the design, so that you can serve the most people with the widest set of needs.
And this is your answer makes me think about this dynamic that's running through your book and through your work, which is, on the one hand, yes, that is a thing that accessibility specialists and accessibility engineers should be thinking about, but it's also, you're describing like a basic design principle, right? Like, think about who's going to be using it, and the problem is just that designers tend to not think about people with disabilities when they design.
And also, it's kind of like I was talking earlier about, like, I as a blind person want to be the one designing the tools that blind people need. The idea of having designers is really modern, right? Like, we didn't have designers like in the 17th century. We had farmers who had problems that they needed to solve. They were like, they didn't go to some scientist to ask how to design the shovel handle. They were like, I need a shovel that's going to be for shoveling, manure. And it needs to be, I need to use these muscles. It's going to be this heavy. This handle's not going to do it. I have to use a different handle. And when they would shape one handle and they would try it and they would be like, oh man, this doesn't work. And they would reshape it and redo it. It's the people that are using the tools that are most well informed about what those tools should be doing and how they should be created. But, in this modern world where design is so disconnected from the person who needs those tools, the designer has a particular obligation to make sure that they're creating tools that are effective for doing. It's a question of ethics that you have to inform yourself about what the people need for that tool to do.
Well, speaking of the people, I think this is a good moment to open it up to questions. Am I right about that?
Thank you.
Yes.
Sniffle. Good people have sniffle.
Before we do that, I just want to, so that I'm not stuck at the end forgetting to say this, Andrew, thank you for agreeing to do this. This was like such an honor.
Oh man.
I think many of you know who Andrew is and about his book, The Country of the Blind. Your subtitle is not in my memory.
I think Josh Miele is the coolest.
A journey. Come on, help me out.
A journey towards Josh Miele's brain. I think it was something like that.
Anyway, Andrew, you are. I greatly admire you and your work, and it's an honor to have been in conversation with you here today.
I hope it's clear the feeling is super mutual, Josh. Thank you so much. Let's hear from some audience members.
We have microphones floating around, so if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and we will get a microphone to you. I have one back here.
It seems like for everybody...
Do you mind saying your name?
I'm sorry. My name is Eric Brinkman.
Hey, Eric.
Thank you. It seems like everybody goes through the experience of learning not to trust the adults in the room, and it seems like that happens especially to blind people, and it's kind of related to what you said about being safe versus being
Free.
Free. And it's you need to be free. You need to figure out exactly what you can do and what you can't. And obviously, I feel like it's typical for parents to say, "Oh, you can do anything." I remember, when I was 5, I'm blind. My parents were saying, "Oh, you can be an astronaut if you want." How would you, you can't. You're not going to tell a 5-year-old you can't do this.
Yeah.
How would you suggest that people handle that if they discover that they have a child who's blind?
Well, I think it's a great framing that you give it, right? Because if you do tell a blind kid you could be an astronaut, or you could be the president of a corporation or whatever, you're not lying, but you're not really. The probabilities are tilted way against that kid. Right? But we have the same problem with sighted kids. It's like, oh yeah, you could be a football player, or you could be on Broadway, or you could be, you can be in Hollywood. Like, we lie to our kids all the time. And so I think that the value of the not portraying for your kids a realistic sense of their the things they are likely to be able to do, the value that you get from the mindset of openness and I could do anything far outweighs the damage that you might do from telling your kids the truth. They'll learn, they'll find out, but telling them that they could do these things is, imagine telling your kid that they can't do these things and having this sort of mindset of inability and constraint and discrimination. Like, it's so much better not to realize how much ableism there is in the world, how much you are not likely to, be the president of GE or whatever. But it might happen, and so that's I think that's a challenge that all parents face, and that the parents of blind kids have to grapple with, and disabled kids have to grapple with in particular. And the creating kids with the can-do, I might be able to do this mindset makes it all the more likely that they will.
Anyone else? Okay, come in.
I agree when you said that. Oh, my name is Audrey Ramnarayan. I'm the parent of Emmanuel Ford. And I agree with you when you said that blind people are more sensitive and observant of things around them, more than sighted people. Because I'll give you a joke. I bought an item from a pharmacy, and I needed a smaller size. I went to the pharmacy to look to get the smaller size. I was in the pharmacy, up and down the aisles, looking, couldn't find the item. And so Emmanuel said to me, "Mommy, but you bought this item in Rite Aid, and we're in CVS." I said, "Wait a minute." And I looked at the receipt. He was correct.
Yeah.
But I said,
Sometimes
"How do you
sighted
know
people
that?"
use their eyes when they should use their brains, right?
And I said to myself, "But how do you know that?" He said, "Because CVS has carpet on the floor, and Rite Aid does not."
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, you got to
simple.
pay attention to the things that you
Yes.
have access to. I totally. Your son was paying attention.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So where can we get a download audio or download of
The book is available on Audible if you if you have some credits to spare, or you can get it from, of course, from Bookshare. The Audible version is also available from Bard, the Braille and Audible talking book download from the National Library Service, which the Andrew Haskell Braille and Talking Book Library can help you with if you don't know how to do.
And also,
Is it available?
Josh's book is here in print also, and he will be happy to sign it with Braille, slate, and stylus
Yeah.
after we're done
Yep,
tonight.
I'll be signing
So
books
stick
in
around if
Braille.
you want to buy a book.
Okay. And is it available in other languages?
No, it's not. But if you write to my publisher and tell them that you wish that it was, maybe it will be.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Josh, I'm Diane Dubrovner. I was
Hi.
wondering how being blind has helped you as a parent.
Well, I have raised two self-hating sighted people, which I'm very, very proud about. They realize that that sighted people are irritating and bless their hearts. I don't mean to. Some of my best friends are sighted people, actually. But it's. I don't think that it helped me as a parent, but it, of course, like everything else that you do as a blind person, there are many things that you have to figure out how you're going to do it. And parenting is a great example of something that a lot of sighted people just do. It's easy to take your kid to a playground and then, keep an eye on them from a bench in the corner. That's not really an option for a blind parent. And so we have to figure out how to do all sorts of things as blind parents. Was that little alarm a thing telling us something, or was that just somebody's phone? Okay. Okay.
Question.
All right, last one.
Anybody else? Anything from? Do we have questions enabled on the live stream, by the way? Is anybody monitoring that?
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Elaine Hall, and hoping you can say a minute. I'm a Bill Gary Rehab Engineering Lab alumna. Could you talk about standing on the shoulders of giants and tell folks about Bill and the boys?
I can. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I so much appreciate you bringing Bill into the room. Bill, Gary, so Andrew mentioned Smith Kettlewell, which is a research institute in San Francisco, a nonprofit research institute where I was a scientist. I was a postdoc and then a scientist and then ran a center there. I was there for about 15 years. And I first was introduced to Smith Kettlewell because they employed a couple of blind electrical engineers. And when I was doing my physics degree at Berkeley, we had a basic semiconductors lab that all physics students needed to do. And the basic semiconductors lab was essentially an electronics lab where you would go and learn how transistors worked and integrated circuits and resistors, and it was basically a circuits class. And when I told my the blind people I knew in Berkeley that I was wondering if any other blind people knew about how to do this, they said, "Oh, you got to go to Smith Kettlewell and talk to Bill Gary." So I did, and Bill had worked at Smith Kettlewell since 1969, when I was born, and was still there when I left in 2018. He's gone now from the world and from Smith Kettlewell, but not forgotten. Bill was a blind electrical engineer who invented all kinds of amazing tools for blind people who wanted to do their own electronics. He also he taught me to solder. He taught lots of other blind people to solder. He taught me so many things. He taught me how to sort of be nice to sighted people who came up with bad ideas for technology for blind people. He was an incredible. He was funny and smart and sweet. And the other thing that I will say about Bill that he taught me kind of unintentionally was that Bill was an old school blind guy. Bill was born in the 40s and was raised. His father was blind. He went to blind school. He was a blind guy who not only was smart and funny and creative and incredibly cool and sensitive and loving, but he acted blind in a way that I wasn't comfortable with. He talked loud. He made irritating, annoying jokes. He acted. Blind people have this word called they're geographical regionalisms, but blinky is what we called it in Berkeley. Like blinky is like when you act sort of stereotypically blind, and Bill was kind of blinky, and I was like so uncomfortable with it at first, and he taught me by being so amazing that man, we all have different blind experiences, and we all have different ways of being in the world, and there's just no judgment for how people act. People do what they have to do, what they have been, from the context where they were raised and learned and grew up, and we all do that. Like I find that the way I act is a product of where I came from, and the way Bill acted was a product of where he came from, but he was an amazing blind mentor, my most important and valuable and impactful blind mentor, I think. And so he taught me so many things, not just about electronics and physics, but about how to be a blind person comfortable in my own blind skin.
Well, Josh, I have to say, as I listen to you describing Bill, you've been that person for so many blind people, and I'm very, very lucky to count myself among them. And maybe now we can all have a round of applause for Josh Miele.
Thank you, Andrew.